I have seen the travail, which God has given over to the sons of Adam to be exercised thereon. Whenever I read Ecclesiastes 3:10, I am reminded that we are called in life to an epic adventure. And while that sounds very dramatic for one to say across from the screen and from the microphone here at the pulpit, the truth of the matter is we are actually called to something phenomenal. Life itself is a miracle, and it is actually quite the toilsome adventure. My favorite movie of all time, and what I believe truly is the best film ever made, is the Christmas movie It's a Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart as George Bailey. And what you find in that is the great adventure of family. This young man, he wants to go all around the world, riding trains, going on boats, and doing all of these theatrical things. But what he finds out is actually the great calling placed on his life that has villains, it has schemes, it has plots, it has trials, it has perilous moments which put you on the cusp of life and death and threaten to take your whole life away and throw you in jail forever. It all hits right at the core of who Adam and Eve were made to be. They were made to have a regal station, to have great responsibility placed on them, with great power, with great dominion over the earth, and they were meant to do that within the family circle. When we see Solomon write in Ecclesiastes 3 that he has seen the travail, he has seen this difficult task, this burden which is placed upon him, he understands that the stakes of life, they are serious. And when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, at first it's going to feel very depressing, that it's nihilistic and dark and there's no purpose to anything. But the truth of the matter is, Solomon has figured out that through all human affairs, whether they be among the rich, among the poor, among the wise and intelligent, or among those who are foolish, they all end up in the grave. Whatever things you think you have purchased, that you have accrued in life, they all end up at the same place. The only way to step beyond that is to step into the purpose and the calling which God has. Indeed, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. All the affairs of man are vanity. But with God, there is a calling beyond that vanity which takes us to a higher place. And none of us can truly understand it because we are mere mortals, but we can walk in it. We can see it. We can understand it enough that we appreciate its value. And today in our study of Revelation 14, the title of our message is The Stakes of Calamity. And what we find here is that walking with Christ, it's not going to be something which is cheap or that is confusing in the sense that it has some serpentine wile that wiggles back and forth and leaves you confused because what was good and moral yesterday is not good and moral today. Instead, it sets you back from the world, where by the worldly standards, what you hear coming through the television, the newspapers, the books, the media, the journal articles, those things do squirm back and forth about what is good, what is not good. But with God, there are seasons indeed, but yet those seasons have their time and their purpose, and they come in a cycle. They come with order, they come with maturity, and they come with purpose that is reliable and true. You can stand firm on the foundation which comes from God. And what we find in Revelation 14 is a bit of a pause. Whenever we read through the book of Revelation, and again, the key to understanding this book is belief. A lot of times we want to read it for formulas or to have some sort of historical hermeneutic and application. But the truth of the matter, if we want to have a good understanding and use of this book and appreciate why it is included in our Holy Scriptures, then we need to understand, one, it is true, and two, read it for the plot first. Before you try to work out any sort of formula from it, to pull away any sort of historical connection, first read it and appreciate its plot. Believe on it as true. Don't add anything to it or take away. Read it as a story of angels and dragons. Begin there that those things are true. Read the plot, appreciate that, and then start applying the frameworks of how this connects to life, how this connects to events of the past, how this connects even to the events around us and towards the future. Then apply it there. But begin with it is true, believe on it, and read it for what it is. Now, several passages and chapters in Revelation take a pause from the broader plot. We look somewhere like Revelation 7, and we find a moment after the first 6 plagues have been unfolded, those seals have been opened up, and with them comes various plagues and things which are going to afflict the world. There are the 7 seals, but there's a pause after the 6th one. When you go and you read the Exodus, you find there's a pause after the first 9 plagues and then that 10th plague. The same thing happens with the seals of Revelation. Insofar as that 10th plague, where the firstborn of Egypt are killed, that's a very heavy and serious event. the whole Jewish calendar is going to be restructured around it, so is the seventh seal so heavy and important in the book of Revelation. The whole scripture takes a pause. But rather than having Moses being told that this is going to be the new calendar, what we find in Revelation 7 in this pause is that God is going to actually prepare a highway for his people. He's going to take 144,000 from the tribes of Israel, from those 12 tribes. He's going to mark them, and he's going to have them prepared. They're going to be given their highway from the calamity. And then, aside from that 144,000, you're going to have a countless number of Gentiles who are brought forth from all the nations, all the tongues, and they are brought before the throne in heaven in robes of white. And forgive me, it's allergy season, crazy stuff going on with the voice. When we come to Revelation 10, we once again find another respite. In Revelation 10, the whole book pauses so that John, who is recording these things, can appreciate how serious they are. And of course, we, who, while we're not like John watching those things firsthand, we are watching them by extension. We too have to appreciate how serious they are. In Revelation 10, John is made to eat by an angel a little bittersweet book. He has this little scroll that he has to eat. And when I preached that chapter there at Jolton Church of the Nazarene where I pastor, there wasn't anybody who volunteered to eat a little book, even a small book. No one wanted to eat one. But in Revelation, John has to eat it. And believe it or not, there is a moral lesson from that. The book is both bitter and sweet. It first feels like honey, then it gets a little sour. And that is actually how truth is. You don't get to pick the truth that you like and go with it, though that's what our modern world does. Our modern world first asks, can I live with that being true? And then, based on how they answer that question, will determine whether or not they want it to be true. But that's not how God called us to live. That's very sinful. That is not how Adam and Eve would have us live. A lot of leaders, a lot of people who have been given responsibility, they don't want to stand up for what is good and true. And they make very shallow arguments, shallow and cowardly decisions, oftentimes in the name of responsibility and in the name of virtues, even though they're actually selling out the future to just have some sort of safety or security in the moment, which of course is a ploy and deception of hell. It is always bad to sell the future at the cost of the present. And it's also bad to give power to evil things. As I said in our study of Revelation 13, evil doesn't just make disasters, it makes those disasters and their solutions, because it knows you're going to want a solution to the disaster, and the solutions that evil offers aren't actually meant to help, they're just meant to bring more power to them and to weed out those who will comply with the evil schemes and those who won't. Evil is that heinous, it doesn't care how many people it kills and destroys along the way. Hell is real, folks, and the serpent really fell. Well, in Revelation 10, whenever John eats that bittersweet book, he then is charged to go out and prophesy to the world. He has responsibility with that. The book is now in your tummy. You can't just decide that I want to throw it up because you've already started to digest it. It's worked its way into your system. When you hear Revelation, which is both bitter and sweet, you now are charged with responsibility. Regardless of your opinion about it, John's opinion of what he ate has no impression on the matter, and neither does ours. Our opinion on it doesn't matter. Once you hear the book of Revelation, you are now charged with responsibility to act thereon. You must act accordingly. Now we get to Revelation 14. 8 minutes into this sermon, we actually start to get to it. In Revelation 14, we find another recess. Now, the best way we might understand this chapter is like a sports announcer. And I almost feel cheap for saying that, but I think that's the best human understanding we can come to here. Because this chapter, it takes its pause, it takes its recess, and it goes to give us a recap and clarification of everything that has happened thus far. What we find in Revelation when we study its plot is that there is this beast which lives in some nether gloom beneath all worlds. It comes out of the bottomless pit. But it doesn't actually begin in Revelation 13. In fact, in Revelation 11, God sends these two prophets. Now, their message comes from God. Their power comes from God. Everything they have that is good comes from God. And the earth does not like hearing the message of these prophets because it doesn't like hearing the truth from God. It thinks they're mean, cruel, or whatever slanderous false argument it gives to stay away from the truth. And even hell is so upset that these prophets are doing the work of God that the beast himself comes out to kill them. And the beast does kill them. He makes war against them and successfully kills them. The whole world does something that we find in our modern day and age. They give gifts and presents, and they make some sort of evil, wicked holiday, unholiday of the matter. And God steps in and says, you know what? I'm actually sovereign here. The beast from hell, all it can do is kill, because that's really all that hell ever does, is kill and destroy. And God says, I'm going to bring these prophets back to life, and better yet, I'm going to call them up to heaven while they're alive, and, well, they're going to be beyond the touch of the beast. And so God does this. And the whole world says, whoa, God actually has the power to give life. He can't just kill like the beast. The beast can only kill, but God, he can do much more than that. God can do just about everything. And so there's a small moment of sanity in Revelation 11 where all of these wicked things, they come to recognize God, and they have fear of God. They fear God. They are afraid of God because they recognize he is the more powerful of the two. And there is a glimpse of hope. But we don't know how long that sanity lasts. And you get Revelation 12 shortly thereafter, and that war gets even worse. War breaks out in heaven. An archangel, Saint Michael, he has to go to war with the dragon, the one who is Satan, the devil, the ancient serpent from the garden, the one who is, that creepy name, the deceiver of worlds. And that's where you get that Greek word oikomenon, which refers to any inhabitant realm where there are things with sentient life. The devil does not just deceive on earth, but also in heaven. In fact, he had a huge number of angels who fell with him. So whenever you hear people make the argument that, oh, it can't be that bad, our society would never fall, no one would really be that wicked or evil, know that, yes, they would. The Bible, in fact, teaches us that angels who were in heaven, they had a perfect home. They had perfect beauty, perfect justice, perfect truth. They had perfect love. They had everything that could be perfectly satisfying and fulfilling in life. Every joy, every want, they had it. And yet they still chose hell. They wanted hell more than they wanted that beauty of God. And if you think angels won't do that in heaven, and in fact they did, you better believe people, men and women, will do that here on earth. We will want hell. We will lust and glutton ourselves over the most monstrous and disgusting, repulsive things. We want that in the end, and that comes with depravity and sin. We have a sin nature. It is real. Now, in Revelation 13, you find the beast come back for round 2. It was soundly defeated in Revelation 11. God proved his sovereignty. But the beast does something in Revelation 13 that is truly heinous. God breathed life into all things that have the breath of life. Whereas death may pop from one thing to another without any sort of connection, the breath of life is always passed from mother to child. Mother and father come together, they have their child, and the breath of life passes therefrom. Even among plants and things which don't have the breath of life per se, they still come forth from seeds. They produce, seeds according to their kind, and the tree according to its kind comes forth. Even in, peculiar worms and parasites and things of the earth, which are rather gross and creepy and don't exist like mammals, they still give forth children according to their kind. That is the natural way. But what we find in Revelation 13 is the final blasphemy, and that's what I call it at least. We find the beast breathing life into something which is not part of the natural order. We find the image of the beast coming to life, and it is heinous. It is blasphemous, not simply because of the blasphemy from its mouth, but its very existence is blasphemy. It is against the natural order. It is the one thing created that is unborn. It did not come as part of creation, so in a way it's uncreation. It is the true undead. It is unborn, and it is the vile end of all things demonic. Now, what we find in Revelation 14, though, is that pause and recess. What we're going to get as we read this chapter is a recount of the score, because one might read Revelation 13 and say, oh my goodness, the whole world bowed down and worshipped this beast. They thought it was innocent. They thought that it was good, that it had nothing to do with morality and spirituality. But I'm not going to rehash last week's sermon, though I encourage you to go check it out. It's called A Serious Warning on Revelation 13 and the Beast. Right now, I want us to talk about the score thereafter, because one might think this beast has changed the scoreboard. He's now got into a realm of blasphemy which no other thing has got into before. But yet, we find something totally different in Revelation 14. And with that being said, a good 15 minutes into our sermon, let's read our scripture. Revelation 14 reads, And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And then I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of great thunder, and I heard the voice of harpers harping along with their harps. So what we find again here is that powerful truth of the throne of heaven. God is worthy of fear. From his throne is not warm fuzzies, but rather booms and peals of lightning and thunder. It is not a symbol of power. It is not a metaphor or allegory of power. It indeed is raw power. It is the power to create all things and to suspend all things above the void, in the way that a bridge might suspend one above the water below. Should God's power subside even for a moment, then all things would cast themselves back into that endless vacuum, that bottomless pit which has neither breadth nor width nor height, nor anything but eternal darkness, where no one can even hold together. And these things, these voices which cry out in heaven, verse 3, and they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts and the elders. And no one could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they were without fault before the throne of God. And pausing just a moment before we get into mid-heaven, what we find here is that God cares a lot about holiness. Holiness is actually important. I go back and I listen to Genesis. Pastor John, who pastors with me at Jolton Church of the Nazarene, is a spectacular teacher, and he does a wonderful job just reading Scripture. He is so versed in the ability to speak and bring the Scriptures to life. Listening to him read the book of Genesis is so thrilling to me. And listening to the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and going down through that lineage, even into Jacob and Esau, you get the impression that people really took value in the word they said. If you give a blessing to someone, it really matters. In fact, when you read Genesis 12 and God says, those who you bless, they are blessed. Those who you curse, they are cursed. It actually matters how we live and do. In our modern world, we act like it doesn't. I say one thing today, another thing tomorrow, and we are none the wiser. But it's actually very corrupting. It's destructive of the world when your news flips-flops, when your politicians flip-flop, when your leaders flip-flop, where your church leaders say things that are irreconcilable with one another. They're all broken apart. And even you in your own life, maybe you are one of those things. Maybe you are one of the leaders and things. Maybe you're just a leader in your household. But whenever things are inconsistent, it actually is very destructive to the world. It rots the world on a very, very serious level. And being holy matters a lot. These things have real consequences. And what we find here is these who are redeemed, they are not defiled. They are holy before God, and God appreciates that and puts a very high price among it. Verse 6 says, And then I saw another angel fly in mid-heaven. And he came, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, every kindred, and tongue, and people. Pausing for just a moment, going and reading from the book of Colossians, Paul reminds us in Colossians 1 that not only is the gospel a blessing to earth, but actually the angels in heaven enjoy hearing the gospel, and it is a blessing to them. Here we find in mid-heaven this angel flying and having the everlasting gospel, preaching to those on the earth, and it is a magnificent thing. It's also worth noting, if you're on earth and an angel is flying in mid-heaven preaching the gospel to you, well, then you are no longer ignorant of it. The whole earth is now aware of the gospel. Now, what they do with that is going to be up to them, but they are indeed made aware. So, if I can abstain from coughing just for a moment, it's trying to come out. We're not going to be defeated by allergies. Verse 7, it says, Saying with a loud voice, to fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark on his forehead or in his hand, then the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall then be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of his torment will ascend up forever and ever, and there shall have no rest, nor day nor night, for those who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receives the mark of his name. Keep in mind, in Revelation 13, a lot of people worship the beast because they were deceived. People do not have to like your idols to be deceived by them. That we need to get back to English 101. What does the word deceived mean? You do not consent to being deceived. You do not get up and say, you know what, I like that news source. I think that's a respectable authority. He has a name doctor next to him. Or they've been doing this job for 30, 40 years, though, so they must be very, very smart. It's not my fault if I go along with them. I picked them out myself. No. None of that's going to work. If you're deceived, you don't even realize you've gone along with it. If you receive the mark, whether you liked it, whether you hated it, if you receive the mark, bad things are coming. That's not my interpretation. That's not my impression. That's not my opinion, my preference, or anything other than that. That is what that scripture says. Revelation 14:11 reads, "And the smoke of their torment shall ascend up forever and ever. They will have no rest, neither day nor night, those who worship the beast and his image, and who received the mark of his name." That is what that scripture says. That is not what I necessarily want it to say, though. I am grateful for scripture, and I will honor and respect it. I'm not here to make it say what I want it to say. I'm instead here to receive what it has to give me. In verse 12, it says, "Here is the call. Here it is, the patience of the saints, for those that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." And then I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, "Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." This reminds me so much of Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Truth is vindicated by truth." Truth wins out in the day. It is better to die in the name of the Lord than to go along with a small, innocent deception. And I say innocent in italics, or perhaps with the air quotes, because it's not actually innocent, but you will think that it is innocent. It is better to die in the Lord for something that the world tells you is small than to go along with deception and find yourself tormented for eternity. Okay, wisdom is vindicated by their deeds. We're going to come back to that verse, Revelation 14:13, because that's one of the big parts of our notes that we're going to get to in a moment, but just hold on to that. Verse 14 tells us, "And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle, thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." Let's pause. Back in Genesis 1, God institutes the natural law. Don't let anyone lead you to think that Genesis has two creation accounts that are somehow different or at odds with one another. There are two layers to creation. One is the natural law, things that we have no choice in, things we cannot change. We can interact with the natural law, but we can't truly escape from it. That is the 7 days of creation. The natural law is instituted. Then you have the creation of Adam and Eve that comes very personal. It has a very intimate look at creation, and with it comes the moral law, things that you can choose to rebel against. You cannot choose in the morning whether it's spring, summer, or winter, or fall. You can't wake up and say, you know what, this year we're only going to have 10 months and it's all going to be summer. Just like you can't say, I'm going to wake up and we're going to have 24 months this year and it's all going to be winter. However, you can wake up in the day and say, you know what, I'm going to eat the apple that God told me not to eat. I'm going to go along with what that creepy little serpent told me to do. We can make that choice. We can choose to break the moral law, and we can rebel against the natural law, but we only find ourselves smashing our head into a brick. And you can do that, but it is just utterly destructive. They're both destructive, but they're also a little bit different. They're different degrees, and they have different consequences. In verse 16, the language of the sickle coming out. This is the law of the seasons. There's a season and time for everything. We have to know what time it is. I've only got one Swatch watch on today. Pull it over here. It's a Swatch watch from the mid-'80s. And according to the time on it, it's almost 5:30. It's about 5:26, maybe 5:27. That is what time it is. I don't get to choose what time it is. I can't say I really wish it was 3:30 because I'd like to have some time to prepare before this sermon. It is the time that it is. There's a lot of people in our world who think they can choose what time it is. We don't like it being 6 p.m., so we're going to pretend that it's 10 a.m. We're a kid who doesn't want to pretend it's bedtime, so we pretend that it's a few hours earlier. We are not in an hour of Christendom anymore. We're not in an hour where we can trust all the institutions anymore. I don't care how invested we are in them, how much we are personally put our time in them. We are not in that hour anymore. We didn't choose, perhaps, for that to change, but the season has changed. When the hour of revelation comes, it is no longer an hour of warm fuzzies. It is no longer an hour of Jesus is going to withdraw his hand and let people just kind of splash around in their sin anymore. It is not the time to be sending out the new workers. Instead, it is time for the sickle to come. The hour is matured. The crop is no longer in that seedling state. It is now time for the sickle. Revelation is now a different season than is the gospel, than even is Genesis. It is now winter. It is time for things to come to their close. And we need to appreciate that. And with that, I could go back to Ecclesiastes and do another message about there being a time and season for everything, but let's just get back to Revelation 14, and let's begin in 17. It says, "And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having his sharp sickle. And another came out of the altar, which had the power over fire, and he cried with a loud voice to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vines of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs." And as we hold away the lingering coughs and sneezes of allergy season, we now get to our notes. Revelation 14 is a pulse. The stakes are being rehashed for us. Again, the best way we might understand this is as a sports announcer. We're reminded here, the beast has gained nothing. Oh, sure, people are deceived, but they are going to be given their due. We are reminded that God has truly prepared a way for his people, that those who are pure and holy, those who are marked by him, and another thing to keep in mind when it comes to not necessarily the 144,000, but that countless number of Gentiles, when we find those other people, and even those in this chapter who have died in the name of the Lord, and we'll get to more of that as the book of Revelation goes on, God does not say you have to have the answer for everything. You don't have to have all the schemes and everything figured out of the world, but you have to stand with me. You may not be the best speaker. You may not even have the best discipline of your character. You might kind of be like Peter. But you know what? If you stand with the Lord in the end, like, say, Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea, that is all that is really expected of you. You're expected to do well and stand next to the Lord. Do the best you can and stand next to the Lord. Make sure in all things you stand next to him, and then do the best you can in all the situations and times in life, all the circumstances which will probably be unique to you, the talents given to you. Do the best you can with those things while you stand next to the Lord. That's it. You may not be the best speaker. You may not have the best attitude always. You may not have the best, all things put together. Of course, the holiness of God should transform all areas of life, but still, you may have some other unresolved things because we're not going to be glorified in this life. But as long as you stand next to Christ and compromise your connection to Christ for nothing, you will be fine. We find a recess here. God is still victorious, and the beast has done nothing to change the score. Again, I feel cheap using the image of a scoreboard and the language of an announcer because the stakes of Revelation are so much higher than that. But I think that's one of the best understandings we could have of this chapter. Babylon is fallen. We're reminded of that. The torments, the tyrannies that are of hell, they are over as far as their sovereignty goes, as far as their governance over what is true. In the end, there will be torment, but it's not going to be on the terms of Babylon. It's not going to be on the terms of tyrants. It's going to be the wages given to those who worked and sown evil, and now that evil is coming forth according to its time. According to its kind. As I've said many times, the typical folly of handling Revelation is in either obsessing over the book or dismissing it outright, both of which spite Revelation 22's warning to neither add nor remove from the book. But what I want to learn is the plot. And as we read the plot of chapter 14 here, we are reminded of those events from Revelation 7, which show us that 144,000. Again, Revelation 7:4, just so you have the specific biblical reference, because we need to be literate and knowledgeable in the scriptures. In Revelation chapter 7, verse 4, it says, "And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel." Then in Revelation 7:9, you also find, "After this I looked, and there were before me a great multitude that no one could count, and these were from every nation, tribe, people, and language, and they all stood together before the throne and before the Lamb. Now these were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands." So now we get back full course to Ecclesiastes, which is where I began this lesson. Forgotten in modern English, which we've forgotten a lot of things in the modern world, but one of the things that we have forgotten in modern English is the travail. Now that's a word you may have not heard used a lot, and that's fine. We need a word in our dictionary to describe the difficult hardship of life that you see George Bailey stepping up to in the end of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. You find someone like Frodo or Bilbo stepping up to it in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. You find people step up to the travail throughout biblical scripture or biblical literature, and it's phenomenal. You look somewhere like Nehemiah. Nehemiah sees the travail. He understands that all the other men in his generation have failed, and he who is a cupbearer to the king, which is not a particularly masculine job. In fact, it's kind of effeminate and emasculating to become a cupbearer. He sees that all the other men have failed. There are no real men in his generation. All the experts, all the nobles, all the sons of David, all the scribes, the scholars, the Levites, the priests, they have all failed, and he has to step up to the plate, and he's willing to do that. This word travail is so important. Because in life, one must face the travail if they're going to do anything beautiful. Now, it's going to be costly. It's going to be more expensive than you would ever imagine, and it's going to demand every allegiance of you. But in life, you must step up to the plate. Our modern world has forgotten this word because it's forgotten that we actually have to answer for the talents we have. You see, we've got it set in our mind that I like Coca-Cola, so I'm going to go out and buy my Cokes and drink them. I don't like Pepsi, so I'm not going to buy that. I don't want these children in my life. So I'm going to center my adult life around adult desires, and the children fall to the wayside. So many issues in our world are centered around adult desires, what their sexual lusts are, or, unlust or desires, undesires, and in no way do we actually care about what's valuable for children and rearing up generations and the beautiful breath of life which brings glory to God. We have forgotten these things because we have forgotten the travail. We have forgotten that you do not consent to who your family is or who your time is, but yet you are expected to be honorable with them. You don't consent to who your neighbors are, the people that live near you. You may have utter disagreements with them, but yet you are expected to be righteous before them and to bless them in a most noble way. If you're a man, you have certain expectations brought upon you that you would answer for those talents. And if you're a lady, you have certain talents expected there of you. And these things, they're not on a result of our content or they're not on our consent, and as that basis may go, and they're not about what we think is bringing contentment, but they're instead about what brings glory to God, and ultimately that brings us more contentment than we could ever imagine. We have forgotten that we are called to things far larger than ourselves, things which we may hate and think are utterly detestable on the front end, but we actually find they are more beautiful. They are going to be more costly than any other pursuit. The horrors one might see on the travail are going to be severe. You look at a movie like The Call of the Wild, the Jack London novel turned into a movie. It's about a Saint Bernard who is stolen away from California and taken to the wilds of Alaska. And for part of it, he is delivering the mail, and you see this beautiful epic of, for God and glory, we're going to deliver the mail on time because that is the noble thing to do. And you see this dog Buck who's lost his home, and every now and then he sees the glimpse of this wolf out in the distance, and he knows that's who he is supposed to be, and he must step up to the occasion of being that wolf. It's his nature calling him. It's the providential design of God calling him to something greater. And even though it's not where he wanted to be, he wants to go back home. He steps up to the plate of delivering the mail, and it's a beautiful thing. And some people will watch that movie and just think, oh, it's a cute dog movie. Other people will watch that movie and just break down and cry because they understand this word, the travail. They have seen it. When Solomon writes, I have seen the travail, he's done half the work. Most people don't even see the travail. When I was a young man, a young pastor, and even a young Christian, maybe even young pre-Christian, when I saw older holiness preachers in the Church of the Nazarene, I saw these men and their wives, they would get up and they would pray, and they would often cry. And I thought maybe it's a show, maybe they've made this as their act, it's part of their preaching voice that they get into. I know people do voices when they read and things, it's actually a good technique we have. I thought maybe this is just their style of praying. But as I've gotten older, as I've lived with people, as I've been with people through the tragedies of life, even seeing mothers have to put their children in the ground, as I've watched the people be battled, be slandered, I've gone to court and testified on behalf of people to help get them out of false accusations and things of that nature. As I've lived and I've walked, I've seen all these costly things. I now understand the reason why those holiness preachers and their wives, why they cry when they pray, is because they have been taken to the edge of all earth. And they have seen down the dark valley. And they understand that whatever suffering we think is on earth, we tell ourselves, there could be no God because there's all this suffering. They have actually been to the point where they've seen the suffering and they know it's worse. It's actually worse than any of these people who make arguments against God think. It's actually worse than any of us could ever comprehend. And they've looked down in that void. And as they have stood on the cusp of all things and they've looked down in that void, they have also seen a light. And they've seen that light from on heaven that comes from on high, it is brighter, more brilliant than anything we could ever imagine. And they see that and they weep. Because every time they pray, they make that connection to God where they have seen the travail. They've seen it. They've seen it, and they understand this is what we are actually called to live in. It's not through any of these petty or distracting wiles which come to absorb us, but they have seen it. In the book of Revelation, those who are killed by the beast, they too have seen the travail. They have seen the deception. They look around at each other and they say, this is a scam. Why are you people going along with the scam? But yet people are. Even those who are supposedly, righteous and good and wise in society, they are all scammed too. The only thing which separates those who are scammed and those who aren't is whether or not their name is written down in the Lamb's Book of Life, which is hidden, concealed there at the foundation of the world, beyond all reach, beyond all geographies of man or angel, where none other than the Lamb himself can discover it. That is where their names are written. That is the only difference. Those who have seen the travail, they often weep. They'll look at something like that movie, Call of the Wild, or even something like It's a Wonderful Life. In the end, you see George Bailey come home and say, isn't it wonderful I'm going to jail? And you realize the movie is satisfied at that point. The fact that the neighbors come home to bail him out in the very end, that is just icing on top of the cake. George Bailey has figured it out when he comes home and says, isn't it wonderful I'm going to jail? He has seen the travail and he has seen the price of the good. That movie, Call of the Wild, with the dog, the Saint Bernard, it ends up in a place where a man who has lost his son and has lost everything is out in the wilderness. And even as Calamity has come to call for his blood there in the remote wilds of Alaska, he is there with this dog and he sees a picture of his child, his son who has been lost, and he sees the beauty of life. And even though it's his last moment, he once again remembers why everything has value. And what we find in Revelation 14 is the stakes of calamity. Ecclesiastes 3:10 says, I have seen the travail, which God has given to the sons of Adam to be exercised thereon. God has made everything beautiful in its time, even placing eternity in the hearts of man, yet no one can discover the work that God has done from beginning to end. Not everyone can even see the travail. Some people just think it's all a great movie. It's a fun movie because we like Middle-earth. We like seeing Frodo in his costume, and we like the wizards and the style of it. But not everyone can see that deeper truth, which is the travail. And that's a word that's hard to learn because it's something that is hard to see. You can't really teach it to someone through a pulpit or through a microphone like it is now. You've got to live and you've got to see it. The old holiness preachers were right when they said, sanctification is somehow connected to a second work of grace where there's a crisis. It's not that God needs a crisis to work. He doesn't. But we who are fallen, we who have human construction, we have flesh and blood, we live in time. We learn in a physical reality around us. God made a physical reality and saw that it was good, by the way. We need those critical moments to see something deeper, something richer. Because it's those moments where we see the travail. Now, the title card for this sermon is the scene of Jochebed, Moses' mother. She prepares him and places him in a basket. Jochebed has glimpsed the travail. When she places the babe Moses in a basket, who doesn't have that name yet, by the way, she realizes is that if she just is the toddler who says, I want it to be 6 p.m. and not 8 p.m., because 8 p.m. is my bedtime, and I refuse to acknowledge the reality of the world. There's a lot of people right now who refuse to acknowledge the reality of the world. These things, they weren't scams, they weren't lies to me. I haven't permitted evil in the world around me. You know, my children aren't being led astray in my institutions. My young people aren't being woven into bad leaders. They'll deny all this thing is happening. They're like children who deny that it's actually bedtime. Jochebed doesn't do that. She recognizes, if I keep this child with me, he will die. A lot of people would say, oh, you know, you've got those responsibilities of a child. You can't just put it in the basket. They would come with their soft tones. They would write their books about it and stuff like that. They would have their doctorates and dissertations of the matter. But the truth of the matter is, it isn't that hour, folks. If Jochebed keeps the baby will die. He will be fed into the Nile. And so what she does is she puts together a reed basket and she prepares it with this baby inside and lays it down and lets the waters take it. And she trusts providence to somehow spare this precious miracle, which is her son. In doing so, the course of human history was changed. Moses, indeed, is a noble hero. His mother, she was exercised on the travail. She was exercised in that beautiful mystery, which comes with more pain, more toil. The price of that ferry, the fare to cross that river, is so high. And in Revelation, the fare to actually stand with God, it's not going to be something where it's, you know, confusing or inconsistent or something like that. Those are things of the world. It's going to be high. The price is you die. You go into the fiery furnace without an angel. The price is you are crucified. You are beheaded. You are burned up at the stake. And not just with everyone shouting at you saying, oh, look, he's a hero, he's a martyr. No, you burn up at the stake while everyone around you accuses you, they slander you, and they want to destroy you. The price is you will be forsaken by the world. We need to understand that. We need to come to terms with it. We need to understand that it will be worse than what you imagine it to be. But the beauty on the other side, the terror of putting your child in a basket is worse than whatever you would imagine. For those mothers who have placed their child in a coffin, it is worse than what anyone could ever say. But the beauty on the other side of the empty tomb is more glorious. Because above all, Christ faced the travail. It was through his victory that we all find hope. In our world, it beckons us to stay at home, to remain immature, to double down in our vices, opinions, and what we want it to be, to double down in insisting that it is 6 p.m. when in fact it is 8 or 10 p.m. And God says you can actually choose to remain. You can choose to live in that lie. But the conclusion of that is you will reap what you have sown. Should you instead step out the door, should you dare to hope and march up the mountain, well, then there will be a beauty beyond imagination. We don't choose the circumstances around us. But yet we have all been born and placed in a time, as found in the book of Esther, we have been established for a time such as this. We don't consent to the talents we have, but we have them. In Revelation 14:12-13, it says, "Here's the patience of the saints, those that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." You know, one of the things I observed early on, the people of the Old Testament oftentimes pray for deliverance and a blessing, and God tells them, okay, how about manual labor? The people come out of exile, how about you rebuild my temple? You want a blessing? How about you rebuild an empire? Rebuild your kingdom under the nose of an enemy empire. That's what the book of Nehemiah. You want a blessing? All right, how about you get up, march out of the land of your father's house, and into the wilderness where I will build for you a nation. How about some nice manual labor? Would you like that as a blessing? Those are the labors of the saints we find often in the Old Testament. But now the labors of the saints which we find in Revelation, their labors are not so ordinary. Their labors are their sacrifice. They are now dead and have died in the Lord. But wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. We in the church, the righteous, must persevere. Whether St. Michael in heaven, that archangel, or here on earth, we must persevere. We cannot deny the truth of our hour, but we must be honest in answer to that which is set before us. We must continue in the faith, be grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which we have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven. Of course, that's from Colossians 1:23, but Revelation 14 pauses to remind us of the stakes of calamity, that victory belongs to Christ, but it does demand every allegiance of us. And thank you for joining me. This is Kingdom of the Logos, and this is our study of Revelation 14. God love you, and have a blessed day.